Okay, hi everyone. We're actually here.
Yay!
We're really happy to be here. Yesterday we were supposed to be live streaming at this time, and was not working at all. And so now we're on a different connection, and I'm hoping that it works okay. It looks like it might be freezing up a little bit already, but I'm hoping that it hangs on, and I hope that you guys can all hear me. Let me know if you're like having any problems hearing, or if there's any issues with the video or anything like that. You can let me know in the live chat. We have lots to talk about, but I also want people watching to please ask questions in the live chat. I'll try to keep my eye on it, but if I'm missing your questions, it's easiest to get my attention if you use the super chat. And I won't be looking at the comments under the YouTube video. So if you're asking questions there, I will not see it, only in live chat. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming back. This is Isabella and K. So let's get started by why don't you, Isabella, start and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here to this YouTube live stream.
Totally. So there's a audio feedback on my end, so I'm just waiting for your second. Okay, Kay, are you hearing it too?
What's happening? Does it sound like an echo, or is it just slow?
It's the repeat of 10 seconds. It's an echo, but it's like 5 to 10 seconds delay.
Oh, I don't hear that. Do other people hear that?
It's just me. I think I should leave and come right back.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, it's just me apparently.
So you can't hear that, Kay?
No, I don't hear it at all. Everything sounds
so
good
it's just
to me.
something on Isabella's end.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look at like this nice. I know nobody's interested in the saga of my like trying to get my work done in Mexico, but I'm in a friend's apartment, and I'm like, I should just rent this as a studio because this looks way better, and the internet's so much better over here. My internet struggles in Mexico are never ending, right? Okay, well, in the meantime, let's start with you, Kay. Why don't you, while we're waiting for Isabella to come back, why don't you talk about yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us about your journey, which sounds very interesting.
Yeah, sure. I'm just like, where do I start? Oh, good. Isabella's back.
It's all good now. It's totally fine now.
It's good.
Kay, okay. I'm gonna get Kay to start instead of you.
Perfect.
And we'll do you after.
Okay. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, well, hi to everyone. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Megan for having me. And thanks to Isabella for getting all this set up and helping to just like platform my voice and my work. A lot of you watching this probably are already familiar with some of my work under the Deprogrammer or also Stop Female Erasure. I've been doing the Deprogrammer for about 5 years now. I started out anonymous for a lot of different reasons. Maybe we'll talk about some of that will come up in this conversation because some of the race issues are part of why I started out anonymous. So anyways, yeah, people know that I'm a former trans rights activist. And I worked at an LGBT nonprofit called The Center. A lot of them are just called that, The Center. I worked at one about over 10 years ago, and I was involved in going into the public school system with all of my rainbow covered materials from the big nonprofits like Glisten and GLAD, going into the schools and teaching young people, children, not young people. Young people were the teachers that we were teaching because they were being indoctrinated at the same time, right? We were teaching the students, minors, children, and the teachers the language of trans ideology. So yeah, I have a background in that. I also I've talked less about this publicly, but I have a really long background in doing all kinds of grassroots community organizing work. I have over 15 years of experience. I focus specifically on building multiracial alliances, specifically to address issues around like state and corporate ecologically destructive projects, supporting Indigenous sovereignty. I've done all kinds of organizing and activism work, supporting families who have lost someone to police violence, all kinds of different stuff, food sovereignty, anything, fracking, tar sands. I've done all kinds of organizing work. So that's a little bit of background on me. I'll pass it over to Isabella because I'm sure I'm going to be talking more about my past, like as we talk about, as this like conversation unfolds.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Glad to have you. Thanks for being here. Isabella, how's your audio? Did that fix?
It's perfect now. I don't know what was going on. It's pristine now.
Okay,
Who are you?
Oh, who am I? Whose body is it? Who am I? I actually got a review the other day, and this woman was like, by the title of this podcast, I thought this was going to be like a leftist feminist vibe.
Oh, like I mean, I sort of did want to try to confuse people a little bit.
Yeah, totally. I was like,
and
exactly.
We want to convert them.
Totally, want to convert them, and yeah, totally.
Yeah, come thinking one thing, and halfway through, wait a minute, I'm getting turfed.
Oh yeah, that's what she got.
Oh,
she
that's
sure
definitely
did.
gonna be happening today.
Oh my gosh, I was getting chills, Kay, when you were talking about like the rainbow like things that you would give out. But yeah, my story is a little different, but I guess you could say I was also on the other side, more as an ally. I was never really an activist. I was indoctrinated into trans ideology in 2016 at a doula training in New York City, my home city. And yeah, I mean, I got into birth work and I wanted to help mothers and babies, and I wanted to, you know, be a reformist and make change within the system of industrial birth. And that just went in hand with progressivism, with quotes, and erasing the words woman and mother. And so for the first 3 years of my doula career, which was successful in that I made money, but wasn't actually making sustainable change, I erased the words woman and mother, never served a single woman who identified as a man. And then I started to peak around like women's health and then vaccines, and then trans stuff kind of came last. But kind of tangential or kind of a parallel, I would say maybe actually to all of the forced language with, you know, calling men women and women men, that was happening also in the birth world with kind of renaming surgeries. You know, one example would be, you know, instead of saying cesarean section, we were asked to say things like belly birth, all these euphemisms for really intense things. So there was a parallel there that started to kind of pique me simultaneously with the birth stuff and then later trans. So then I lost all my friends, was called a TERF and a bigot, and then COVID hit, and that was kind of the last straw. And so from there, I just thought, okay, I need to talk about this and articulate what I've going through, because I know I'm not the only one. If I can get kicked out of a women's health training for using the words woman and mother, this is much bigger than I thought. This whole thing is much bigger than I thought. So that kind of catapulted me into the podcast and coaching and now hosting Kay Yang on for this masterclass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and for those, I just want to. Sorry, I'm just gonna plug your masterclass for a sec for people who are just tuning in. Isabella is posting Kay Yang. They're doing a masterclass on unpacking common myths and misconceptions about Indigenous two-spirit and third genders. And the link to sign up is in the show notes below. I'll also put that link in the live chat for people who want to learn more about all this and have a more in-depth discussion. You guys can talk about the masterclass a little bit more later on the show, because obviously I mean, I think, Isabella, like, your story is so common to so many women. Like, I hear from so many women who went through similar things, in that, they started pushing back against gender identity ideologies in, their activist communities, or like at their place of employment, or, wherever they were, media, politics, teaching, obviously, like in the midwifery community, and losing all their friends, being ostracized, like feeling sort of hopeless. But I mean, then it's over. And I know that at our panel in Austin, we had some women in the audience feeling, I think, pretty depressed about the whole situation, and feeling, like a lot of loss. And I mean, I just said, like, it gets better, which is like obviously a cliche, and not a cliche that was originally intended for the purpose of turfing. But yeah, I think the internet,
It's lagging a little bit.
And I don't know if all of us lag when Megan lags, or if it's just us.
I think it's just Megan, because your connection is good for me.
Yeah, you look clear to me. I want to riff off what you were saying, Isabella, about like the things that you started to notice that started to make you realize that there was something else going on. Because, as I just said, I was indoctrinating people with the language of trans ideology. I was perfectly fine with language that erased women and females, because at the time I personally felt alienated from my own body, and I had a lot of dysphoria about who I was and my body and all of that stuff. And I didn't really so much as have a problem with a language that erased women. What I really started to have a problem with was that I noticed a lot of normalization of sexualization of children, and that it was being excused by people. And that kind of takes me to where I really had my peak moment. Well, I had a lot of peak stops along the way, but when a female friend of mine who was dating a male who identified as a trans woman of color, she, called me looking for support, because this man was caught in the act by the mother of a boy who he met on the internet and groomed, and he was raping the child when the mother caught him.
Yeah.
And all of my friends said that we still, not only did we have to still acknowledge him as a woman, but we needed to immediately organize ourselves and our resources to raise money for him, to move him from the male facility to a female facility, a pedophile. So that was when I noticed that was like there were all these things that I noticed about boundaries being pushed with the sexualization of children, and there not being firm boundaries around keeping rapists and pedophiles out of our organizing spaces. And when that happened, it was all over for me. My mind blew all the way open. I was done. I knew I was never going to call a man a woman ever again. And is Megan back? Is she frozen again?
I think she's still frozen. Well, yeah, that I mean, your peak story is like real, like the worst of as bad as it gets, really. I mean, that's
it's scary that it had to get that bad for me to say no. And like, I realized at the time that I was having a lot of anxiety about the trans stuff, but I didn't realize that's what it was about. I was like misplacing my concerns and my anxieties and my fear and my anger onto other topics.
Yeah.
And then I started to, like, once that happened, I just let myself sit in all the things that I had been, that had been building for me, making me feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
I mean, you're definitely, it's interesting, like the guilt and the, like, having been on the other side and now being on this side. Like, I feel like a lot of women have been coming to me with that feeling of having affirmed, the delusion of a family member or, a child in their life who, believes that they're stuck in the wrong body. And then now, they're like, is it too late? And sometimes, like, the medicalization has already happened. And just like, yeah, the parents who are navigating this and also giving mixed messages. I mean, without getting on too much of a tangent there, like, coming back to why we're doing this is because I think you and I are in a position that is like, I think the best position to be in, which is that we have clarity, right? And I'm still going to be learning from you at the masterclass. Not that we know everything, but that, we each have clarity, and that is the function of the class, is to offer clarity so that women can feel armed in articulating themselves, because nobody, you don't have to have like an academic background or high intellectual capacity to know what a woman is or a man is. Like, everybody already knows the truth, and what we are offering, what you are going to be doing is an advanced critique for those who really want to develop the language and cultivate the practice of speaking about, this in a bit more detail. And then also just to receive validation that like what they already know is true, no matter how many times they're, gaslit by peers and colleagues. And Megan, we were just kind of going into like our kind of like peak stories, and the kind of the positioning of, offering the validation and the clarity now being on the other side to women who are still kind of struggling or in between. That really is the function of the purpose of this masterclass is, speaking to what you said at the Austin event, is really like, what do we all want? We want to be in connection with one another. We want to feel like we're not alone and that we are like a part of something. And so women who are just kind of ousted and kind of left to be fend for themselves, it's scary.
Yeah, and I think that's what drives people towards activism and towards activist movements, that, people want to feel like they're a part of something. They want to feel like they're affecting change. They want to feel like they're a part of a community. And the unfortunate reality is that often those activist groups and those activist movements are actually either toxic or misguided or kind of just rooted in these myths, these like mistruths, these misconceptions, and people, you kind of become isolated within that community.
Yeah, there's also the fact that these movements are not necessarily organic. They're presented to the public as being organic grassroots movements, but most of what we're presented to as a movement is not a movement. This is social engineering. People have been intentionally activated through indoctrination to fulfill like a role, right? So with these movements, a lot of them are being funded by large nonprofit organizations that contract with the government, the U.S. government, other national governments and international governments. So these, what we think of as a movement and what we see on TV, it's not always organic. It's not necessarily natural. And that's just like with the LGBT and the trans issue. This didn't happen naturally. This was careful, like precise indoctrination over the years. And there was an entire plan to unroll this and unfold this in society. A lot of people are coming on to just finding my work today and being like, oh my God, it's crazy what's happening now. I'm like, this has been happening for over 10 years. It's just now that people are starting to see it. And enough people like Megan and other women that have been putting themselves out there and talking about this and making this visible. Now, like other women are like myself are coming to the table being like, oh my God, I have to say something. So this is also part of why we're doing the class, right? This is about honestly about making a more inclusive environment for gender critical women. Like, we have to have women of all races and all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all walks of life to be standing up and saying no to this. So this is the issue of representation as well. And I think it's really
about
issue there.
Oh, Megan, you're frozen.
I froze, I think.
Oh, there you
go on. Okay. Yeah, I know I've so just ignore me when I freeze. Here can keep things up when I'm gone. But I don't know if Kay talked about it when I was out 5 minutes ago, but I want to hear a bit more about like what your K sort of analysis and approach to race and race politics was before you, I don't know how you would describe it, before you changed your mind, before you sort of opened your eyes.
Yeah, it's interesting because some things have changed and some have not. Some of my beliefs are fundamental and I carry them into this conversation now, and that's actually part of what I'm going to be bringing into the class, right? What I'm keeping. And I threw away a lot of the stuff that was really essentialist and that was really like lateral violence and laterally directed. And I'm only interested now really in looking up at where all of this is coming from and who is engineering all of this division. And I'm no longer interested in having, I don't know, just like getting into like low level base, like arguing and stuff with people. Like I used to be really confrontational and stuff and like find confrontation to be like, and I still think some confrontation is useful, right? Like we're confronting things right now in this conversation, but I used to be like really like kind of like aggressive with my race politics. I used language like hate a lot. I said things like I hate white people. That was really common for me, and like those are all the things that I don't agree with anymore and that doesn't resonate with me anymore. But there's a lot of my race politic that does, right? Like an analysis around race, around colonization, around slavery, and just around racial construction in the United States, around just how race is used globally to push different agendas and pit different people against one another. I'm interested in looking at the bigger patterns now. So Megan's gone again. I'm just going to kind of keep going and just, take it away a little bit. It's time. It's time to level up our understanding, right? We have to have a better understanding of the trajectory of the transgender industry because it's not as simple as some people think that it is, right? It's much deeper. And transgender it's really just a stop along the way to breaking down the sexually dimorphic nature of reality and humanity. And this is all to push us to accept transhumanist technologies like artificial reproduction and birth through external wombs, it's not a womb, and CRISPR gene editing technology. If you don't know what CRISPR is, you need to know. Like, this is not just about perverted men taking over our spaces or these blue-haired teachers like grooming kids or men in drag reading to children at the library. All of those things are horrible, and I talk about all of those things because they're the surface level symptoms of what's going on. But what we're seeing happening in the world, this is really the next step and the logical conclusion of the colonial project. We're talking about the colonization of women, of female, and of our female bodies. So this is the colonization of female reproductive technology, and it's the attempted takeover and control of all biological life on Earth. That's what this is. So control of the land through settler colonialism, enclosure of all common space, military and corporate control, control of labor through systems of capitalist exploitation, slavery. This is all part of an overarching agenda, and we need to examine all of these pieces together as parts of a moving whole and not as these disparate, separate pieces. And the more we avoid synthesizing this information, the more easy it's going to be to continue to engineer the public down this path and to control us and to keep women quiet about this. So I really want women to understand. And I talked about this on the interview that we just did, Isabella, on the UN. But like, when you hear population control, which is a lot, everybody's talking about that right now because this is what's going on. Population control means woman control. And women birth and create life. We create the so-called population, right? We don't need and we don't want self-appointed global governing bodies like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum controlling. We don't want them controlling world population, right? We need empowered sovereign women with knowledge over our female bodies, pregnancy, and birth. So we don't need and we don't want the UN or the World Economic Forum controlling global population. And the UN has over 193 nation member states. And guess what? They're not just speaking for white women. They're speaking on behalf of women of all races and ethnicities all around the world. So this is imperative for women of all races to stand up. And we cannot afford to not talk about this issue, right? Go ahead. I don't want to just keep going on and on because I could.
If Megan, if you're there, maybe you want to interject. I had a follow-up kind of question, like or something I wanted to. Your original question.
Yeah, you go ahead, Isabella.
Your original question for Kay was, how has her analysis changed? And she was just saying how, like at the core, like it's actually remained the same, but she's less interested in what I'm hearing is like the lateral kind of violence and the kind of like, you have to do your inner work to get through, and rather going like top, like really pointing to the top and looking at the structural systems that are keeping us kind of obedient or whatnot. And we recorded an interview about the UN and the protests that Kay organized at the UN a couple months ago. And you had said something, Kay, to me about the intentional placement of people of color at the front of the LGBT, marketing. Would you maybe speak to that?
Yeah, all of that is totally on purpose, and it's real, and it's a pattern. And I've been noticing it from the beginning. I knew it was like that because I was but prior to coming into like these gender critical spaces and stuff, I was almost completely surrounded by like race critical conscious people of color, almost exclusively. So, and it's actually, I know that we need to talk about race when we're talking about trans, because part of how I really like solidified my indoctrination to trans was by believing that, oh, we can't address issues of racial injustice unless we're including trans.
Right.
And I was indoctrinated to that. I was teaching that to other people. I was teaching that to white people. I was teaching it to people of color. I was being a role model to other Asian youth about that and teaching them that this is, we need to trans everything. And yeah, and it's actually really disturbing because a lot of the youth that I was influencing at the time, like I know that they're still involved in the trans cult. I've seen some of them having surgeries. I've seen all kinds of stuff. So as much as I influenced all of that stuff, I want to use my voice now and all the like experience and the knowledge that I have to influence people in a better way, right? Like to looking at the bigger picture issues, looking at what's going on with the UN. And for example, we're talking about, you asked me about them using people of color on the propaganda and tokenizing people. That is absolutely going on. The UN does that all the time. They're pushing through a lot of these changes by saying, oh, well, we have to include like, we have to be culturally sensitive to these other races, and this is about intersectionality, and it's not. The UN, it's interesting. I just was looking at some of their stuff today, and they're using the language of Two-Spirit. They're using the language of intersectionality. They're trying to co-opt anything that they think will be relatable for people. And they definitely want to use people of color. Like, I was being used, and I was being rewarded when I was saying things that supported the agenda, right? I was being rewarded. And by the way, I used to say like incendiary things online all the time, like all kinds of crazy things, and I never got censored for it. Now I'm getting censored left and right for just speaking about basic reality. So that tells me a lot about what I should and shouldn't be saying, right? And we should always be saying what they don't want us to.
I'm gonna just quickly say something before I cut out again. Sorry, my connection's a little unstable over here. I guess I'm interested to hear more about like the connection between race and gender identity, or the purported, and what were you taught, or what beliefs better descriptors for that about race and gender identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I was talking
like,
about
were you taught that there was a
like where was the crossover with them? I guess like part where the crossover came from is really this confusion with sex and gender, right? Because I was talking about colonialism, talking about race, talking about sexism. I mean, I'm a woman. I'm a racialized woman in America. My everyday experience is filtered through my sexed body and my raced body. And so I was talking about those real things, those are things we need to talk about. But then in my mind, I got confused about sex and gender through the gender identity indoctrination. And that's where like everything went wrong, I think. And that confusion, it's interesting to me. I've talked about this before, but when I was going into the schools indoctrinating children, I didn't even really understand the material that I was indoctrinating them with. Like the language that was being used, some of it didn't make sense to me. And that's because now on the other side of it, I know none of it makes sense. But back then I was trying to do all these mental gymnastics to try to fit in everything together. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Isabella.
Something that just occurred to me, like, well, we've kind of talked about the function of the confusion, like that they've complicated things so much so that the conscious mind just like really wants to shut down. Like it either seems like too complicated, like the function of postmodernism is to like just take you to a place where of no return. And the function of obviously adding the T to the LGB was really strategic, but then like adding all the other letters, like it's just gibberish. Like this acronym that's like 12, 14 characters long is like, it actually just amounts to a lot of gibberish. And it makes it so that, right, we can't kind of parse through and tease out what's actually there. And that is what I love about your work so much. It's about the kind of teasing out each part. And this one part that, is going to be the focus of the masterclass is, I think, one of the most controversial parts that, I think even women and men who consider themselves to be, to hold a radical feminist analysis or to be gender critical will stay away from this talking point. Mm-hmm. And so knowing what we know, if people are staying away from something, there's generally like a lot of like layers there, myself included. Like I just have a kind of like, well, I know that trans, I know that it, obviously trans can't be aged because it is a synthetic identity that can only exist with the medical technology to make it so. But what you're going to be getting into is like just the complexity of the topic. Mm-hmm.
And really getting people to understand how this is colonialism. This is colonization. It's the same thing. They are one and the same.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what the class is actually going to be about.
Right.
Helping you to understand the bigger picture about how all of this is connected.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a clip that I think may or may not be featured in your presentation that we had talked about of Indigenous man. Mm-hmm. Who was featured in a Vice documentary. I think it was Vice or Vox or one of the or Al Jazeera. I can't remember who it was, but he's like uplifted as this kind of like community hero, and he's like a nurse practitioner, and he's putting children on puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones, and he himself has not been, medicalized. So you're also going to be getting to how this agenda targets, Indigenous communities.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
to be the foot soldiers of the agenda.
They're tokenizing. They are, they're using people, right? And they are indoctrinating Native youth as well. The whole concept, these like concepts of third gender and two-spirit, they're being used to try to naturalize the idea of gender identity and say that like, oh, well, it's always existed. All these other cultures have gender identity. If you don't accept it, it's just because you come from like a dominating culture of hate or whatever. Mm-hmm. And really the reason why these terms are being normalized, again, this is to normalize the medicalization, and this is for the acceptance of transhumanist technologies. And the US is the #1 exporter, basically, of trans ideology. And if people have been following along with the gender mapper, Alex Aaron, she has updated the gender map recently. And if you take a look at it, I mean, it's horrifying. It's all over the world, but the US is full of this shit.
Yeah.
So when it comes to how Two-Spirit is being weaponized, the target is Native youth, right? Because they want them to be medicalized. And this is a eugenics project as well, okay? So, of course, this goes hand in hand because eugenics has been being used against Native people as a big part of the colonial project. Yeah. Right? And not just against Native people, it's been used against Black women and other women of color and all kinds of white women and poor women, imprisoned women. So it's about eugenics. It's about targeting the Native youth to, again, put the target on their own body. Don't change society, change your body. And that's wrong. So it's really dangerous that they are pushing Native youth towards this idea of medicalization. But the target is not, it's directly harming Native youth, and it's using them, but they're doing it also on purpose to silence people, right? They want to silence white liberals. They want to silence people of color from speaking up. And Native women are being silenced on this issue. Okay, if people are wondering, oh, how come a Native woman isn't speaking on this? Well, first of all, Native women have been speaking about this. I'm going to be sharing work from Native women who spoke about this, direct quotes, giving all kinds of resources. And also Native women are speaking about this in private. I've had many conversations in private about this. That's part of why I'm doing this, because women are scared to speak. Women are scared to speak. And, when I was in Madison, Wisconsin recently to support Thistle Pedersen of Women's Liberation Radio News for her being attacked for putting up a sticker and having her free speech attacked. And a bunch of us women gathered there and spoke. I was doing live streaming, and I had a bunch of TRAs like getting in my face and people screaming at me. And they were trying to say that they were saying all kinds of racist stuff, actually, and then trying to say that we were racist. And I was, kind of going in a back and forth with them. And I said a bunch of stuff to them that had them like they didn't know what to do anymore, because I know all the language and I know better than they do. And they were kind of like stunned and like, we don't know what to say. Well, after coming home, I guess some of these TRAs combed through, found my old private social media that has nothing to do with my current life, went through there, combed through my friends who had posted on my wall, went through, started going to each one of those people, telling them that they need to stay away from me, and then they actually had the nerve to find a friend of mine, a Native woman, in public, in physical space, at a film festival, confront her in public while she was supposed to be being awarded and recognized, and make her try to be accountable for her relationship to me. Yeah, that happened. And it's messed up. And people wonder why women are scared to speak, why Native women, by women of color, are not speaking about this issue, because there is so much silencing going on from within communities as well.
That's terrifying. Was she okay? I mean, like physically?
Yeah, she was fine. Oh, she's a badass warrior woman. She was totally fine. But it was messed up, She called me being like, I don't know what's going on here, but she defended me, obviously. But
it's this whole like, you can't, if I see that you shared a post of this person who likes this person who likes that person, like, the entitlement people have to other people's lives, and
to go around and like find people and hunt them down in person.
It's totally
so disturbing. And also just and all of that was to do what? To like protect trans people or something? You're gonna go and harass a Native woman in public. It's really messed up. So you know, that's just one example of people around me being told not to associate with me, not to talk to me, not to publicly show that they've been with me in person. Yeah, it's like I've been kind of pariahed.
Because you're a huge liability.
Mm-hmm.
You
Oh
are
yeah,
a
and
huge,
I'm coming
huge
for
liability.
them.
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
just getting started. I'm just getting started because this shit is not going to stand. Like, we're not doing this.
Yeah. No, they're as strong as their effort is, you know, reflects the power that you hold, you know, and they're relentless, just like you are, you know, like unstoppable. So it makes sense.
And like anybody who knows me from before knows that I've never been scared of being called names or divisive or anything before. I've always stood for the truth. I've always stood up for women and children, and I've always stood for the earth, and that's what I'm still doing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
They might not understand it, but they will soon, because this isn't that hard to understand once you allow yourself to think about it, and once you have the pieces all put together for you. The problem is that the pieces are all disparate, and so people are getting little bits of information here and there that doesn't resonate with them, or that they feel like triggered or offended by, so they're not even putting the bigger picture together. So that's part of the work that I'm doing in this class, right? I'm really just trying to make everything. I'm taking all this research, I'm putting my analysis on it, and I'm putting it in a package that is understandable, that's relatable, and also that's culturally sensitive, right? And that is respectful, and being done in a way that I want anyone to be able to watch this video and not feel not feel like they're being personally attacked, or like they're being misrepresented, or like their race is being used or anything. I've taken a lot of pains to make this something that can be a resource for not just who comes to the class initially, but this is going to have waves and ripples of information that are hopefully going to help create space for gender critical women to welcome other women to the table. Because I know that the gender critical women that are out there speaking now are ready for that. If they weren't, I wouldn't be here on this channel having this conversation. So there are women that have been speaking on this, that are trying to make space and trying to offer a platform and make room at the table for other women to come forward. And I think that having these conversations and talking about this stuff is going to help do that.
Hi, I'm back. Sorry.
We missed you.
I plugged into the Ethernet, so
you've changed your scenery.
Why? Yeah, I had to move into a different room to plug in, but I'm here and I'm not cutting out anymore. My dog is acting like a psycho. So I just I have some questions that I want to ask, and let me know if I'm being repetitive, because I missed, unfortunately, a lot of what you just said in my internet in and out. But I guess I'm curious to know if you can talk specifically about what two-spirit actually means. I mean, a lot of people will say, like, oh, trans has always been around. Trans is like global. Trans like comes from indigenous cultures, which then is like tied to that racism accusation. Like, if you're like critical of gender identity ideology, or you're questioning of that concept, then I guess you're a racist, because this has been around in indigenous culture forever. And I know that indigenous culture is not a real thing. These are like cultures that are quite diverse, and people are like lumping in swaths of different peoples and histories into one thing. But what does that mean? Like, is two-spirit a legitimate concept?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up that aspect, right, of all this homogenization of various cultures being swept under this native culture. And that speaks to exactly part of where two-spirit comes from, because it is a pan-native identity, which means that it doesn't come from one. It doesn't have a traditional lineage to a specific group. It doesn't have a cultural relevancy to a specific group. It is a pan-native term. It was made up. And it depends where you're looking for information, right? This is another interesting thing about Two-Spirit is it starts to get kind of murky, the origin story of where this actually comes from. And I've been doing my best to trace it. And it's so interesting because I've had so many Two-Spirit friends and been around Two-Spirit people to where it was like a regular part of my life. It was no question to me. It was totally normal. And I never knew any of this stuff, and I don't think any of them knew the root of where this term was coming from. But yeah, it's a pan-native term. It comes from a pan-indigenous, well, they say it came from a pan-indigenous intertribal conference in Winnipeg in 1990. Now, that's according to some sources. Now, the woman who they say actually coined it, she says something else. And she actually says a couple of different things that don't align. So that's part of what I'm going to get into in the class is just there's some murky, questionable scholarship about the origins of the terminology itself. And actually, a woman pointed out today, a woman that I follow and who follows me, and she was on Isabella on one of your posts. I don't know if you saw what she said, but she's Ojibwe, and she was saying like, why did a woman from another nation make up this term, and why is it an Ojibwe term, right? So it doesn't even make sense exactly where this is coming from, and you can see how it's a pan identity. It's not a traditional identity. So that's where a lot of the confusion comes in, is people think like Two-Spirit means a specific culturally appropriate role for a certain community, but it doesn't. It's a catch-all phrase similar to queer, right? Or similar to like how the LGBT acronym is just this like total catch-all phrase. So within Two-Spirit, there are people who there are some people who do have like a connection to a traditional role or a traditional name or function from their society, but it's also a lot of native people who reject the modernity of the LGBT identity, right? They don't want to be associated with lesbian, gay, bisexual, because that's culturally different from them, right? And they want to distance themselves from the colonizing culture's terminology, which I can't blame them. So that's also part of why people adopted the terminology of Two-Spirit. But man, there's so much I could say about it. I don't know which way to go with it.
So Two-Spirit's a relatively new term then.
Yes. It came about 1990 is the date that's given for when it was coined. And like I said, they say if you look up where it comes from, you're probably going to get a lot of stuff that says, oh, the Winnipeg Intertribal Conference. And guess what? That conference, those people who made up that term, they don't speak for all Native people or all Indigenous cultures in the Americas or anywhere else. It was literally like 80 people from different groups, a lot of them urban, getting together and coming up with this terminology. And I think that like some of like the use of Two-Spirit, I have seen it be empowering for some people. I'm not trying to say that Two-Spirit shouldn't exist at all. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that what we think it is not correct, and the way that it's being used and weaponized is extremely dangerous, and it's being used to promote this global agenda of colonizing female reproductive technology. And they're saying like, if you don't support this, you're racist. That doesn't make sense, because women of all races and ethnicities around the world are being affected by this, especially women who are most marginalized. And here in this country, like, violence against Indigenous women is massive issue that doesn't get any attention at all. I hear more about Two-Spirit than I hear about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Why is that? Why is that? Because that's not good for the agenda, right? Because missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls means the continuation of colonization, means that the female sex class is at a specific, the female sex class is being targeted, and females in colonized places are being specifically targeted. And this trans agenda relies on erasing the fact that females are being targeted based on our sex biology. They need to erase that fact. So of course they want to promote Two-Spirit everywhere, and you won't hear anything else about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. You won't hear about the sex trafficking. You won't hear about the meth issues. You won't hear about the targeting of sacred sites. You won't hear about Indigenous women being targeted by corporations and the government just for staying where they were born and where they want to stay, for trying to have their babies and raise them outside of the system. You won't hear any of that. Okay, you're just going to hear more Two-Spirit. But I am going to get into all of that in the class, because that's all the important information that we're missing, that they're keeping from us by shoving Two-Spirit in our face. So yeah, I'm not trying to present myself as an expert about Indigenous people or to speak on behalf of anybody else. I speak for myself. I'm not trying to say I'm an expert in any specific culture's traditions. What I am an expert on is, tracking the historical and the future trajectories of the trans agenda. Not going to be like some hokey presentation where I tell you about all these different third gender roles. No, that's not what it's going to be. Sorry if you thought that's what it is. But this is more about, showing how these different third gender roles and these Two-Spirit roles are working in tandem to take away our rights, and really just looking at the overarching patterns, right? Recognizing how this is being used, recognizing where the manipulations come into play, and strengthening our understanding and strengthening our ability to talk about this, our comfortability level, because we need to level up. This is the next, this is where the conversation is headed. I'm telling you right now, if you're listening to this, watch this play out, because I guarantee this is going to become more and more of an issue. I guarantee. And I've been like calling everything for a while now. So, I can see this coming, and it's all over the propaganda. And I'm still somewhat clued into some of my old communities as well. I'm watching what's going on. I am analyzing what's happening. And this is where we need to be talking about. We can't afford to not talk about this issue.
Yeah.
We can't.
I really have been kind of like sharing about this event as like the missing piece. Like, we really believe that this information is the missing piece, even within our like peers and colleagues, collaborators, that this is really the missing piece. And, kind of, adding on to what you said about, this is not, this class is not about speaking on behalf of, or, whatever. And you are positioning yourself as an expert in your analysis. And I think that's really triggering to people, like your level of clarity and commitment.
They also don't know anything about me. These people that are critiquing this stuff don't know anything about me or my past or my connections, my relationships, my experiences. If they did, they'd be like this.
Right. But it's like, there's only, something that, obviously we've been encountering on the like production side of putting on an event like this is, immediately, why is this not a class, by Indigenous women? Why did not, people ask me, Isabella, why didn't you use your platform to host a panel of Indigenous women? Mind you, I have been trying to get Indigenous women to speak on this issue for almost 2 years now. And I think, shedding light on what you just described about, that these conversations are happening, but mostly in private. And there's a vulnerability.
I'm having them in private with Native women.
Yes. So that it's not that, there's just a different level of exposure and vulnerability, here. And, maybe, Megan, something that we've been like encountering on the like back end and the production side of this event is obviously getting questions of like, why isn't this a panel of Indigenous women speaking? How dare you? And
how dare you?
What kinds of people are challenging you with these questions and comments?
It's been across the board. It's been it's women who, are, who identify themselves as, Native American or Indigenous. Mind you, like, these are mostly anonymous accounts. Like, when we're talking to people on the internet, we always have to remind ourselves that we have literally no idea who we're talking to.
Right.
So that's one element. I've gotten, emails from women who I think are maybe Anglo, who consider themselves radical feminists, who are also upset. So it's been across the board. But we've also not only is this a controversial thing to be talking about, but in the context of social media, we've been encountering like really only things you could encounter on 2022. You know, like for one example that we kept running into was women kept accusing me of blocking them and limiting their comment. So I have a setting on Instagram where you have to follow me in order to comment on my posts. And that is one way that I protect myself and have a boundary around trolls. And I'm really proud of that boundary. But if you're not aware of that function, or if you are, you'll strategically, you know, if you're a troll, for example, or someone who's just trying to kind of like cause a ruckus will follow me and then leave a comment, and then they'll unfollow me rapidly. And then they'll try to reply to my reply and then accuse me of blocking them. And so it's this whole kind of, then there's this whole narrative and a piling on, Isabella, why are you blocking Indigenous women?
Yeah,
Like,
which never even happened.
Well, and just it's a waste of your time, and it's like, I mean, and people when they start accusing you of doing things like that are like, I thought you supported free speech, and now you're censoring me, and it's like, bro, this is not censorship. Like, I'm supposed to let anything just come at me and take it, and then there's also an expectation that you should be responding and engaging with like every single comment that comes at you, and it's like, Lord, that's like more than a full-time job.
Oh, totally. And not only respond, but in a very specific timeline. I mean, there was one woman who left a comment who I did end up blocking, and we had actually, Kay and I had
a long response to her.
Kay and I had a meeting about responding, you know, because we really thought it was an important question. And
well, you guys are bigger people than me, because I would have been like, nope.
before we could even respond, she left 14 comments of, you know, just kind of ramming, and, you know, the entitlement not only to a response, but to respond in a very specific time frame. So these are like uniquely 2022 like problems, you know, or obstacles that we're encountering, even in trying to make this event happen at all. So yeah, we just wanted to kind of like bring that up.
Yeah.
It's so funny because, so if you, in my past life, I got attacked a lot for a lot of the things that I spoke out about. Some of those things, I'm like, well, I critique some of what I said too, but a lot of what I was talking about, I was being attacked for saying, you know, truthful things, but some of it questionable, right? So anyways, in my old life, there's all this like propaganda about me on the internet that says that I really, really hate white people and stuff. And it's so funny because now it's like back then I would like try to speak about racism and like everybody would get mad, white people would get angry. And then all of a sudden, like white liberals got really excited about talking about racism. Then white liberals decided that they know more about racism than I do. Then they decided that I'm racist and they're going to tell me every chance they get.
Hard to keep up, eh?
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Eh? I love that.
My Canadianisms. I guess did I miss you talking about anonymity? Did you get to that yet?
Well, yeah, a little bit about the anonymity.
So talk about why. So you were anonymous initially for how long? When did you decide to no longer be anonymous, and what happened around that?
I was anonymous and speaking about this for like a few years. And I think that I was anonymous on purpose and strategically. And I knew that I wasn't going to be anonymous forever. I knew that. I knew it wouldn't be possible. But I knew that strategically for me, it would work better that way. If I presented, if I just like stayed off of like who I am and my personal beliefs, my identity, my experiences, my past, my connections, and if I just focused on the message. So that's what I did. And when I was coming into this conversation, I was looking around like, who's talking about this? Oh my God. Like, this is part of why I was deterred from ever coming into this is, white feminism. It's white feminism. This is an issue only for like, you know, pearl clutching white women. And if you are concerned about this issue, then you're just ridiculous. You're being like them or whatever. So I'm a little off my train of thought, but it's like, sorry, I did take a note
Do you
about
feel
this.
like you are more or less effective as an anonymous or non-anonymous? Like, I tend to like, I mean, I just want to be transparent, right? Like, I've been sort of I completely understand why women are anonymous and why some people actually have to be anonymous, because they'll lose their jobs, or it's dangerous to their families, so on and so forth. But I do tend to believe that women are more effective in doing this work when they're not anonymous, because it sort of it for sure empowers other women to speak out, and because I think it offers more weight to what individuals are saying when it's like their name and their face, and they are actually taking a risk and in doing that. I'm just wondering what you think.
Yeah, this is interesting to me, because I actually remember myself like getting annoyed when I heard you say stuff like that before in the past. I was like, I like it, but I feel personally attacked by this.
Yeah, of course.
Even though obviously it wasn't personal.
Fair
Like,
enough.
okay, I feel attacked.
Yeah, she's
But,
criticizing me specifically.
But yeah, I think like it's different for everyone, right? Like I think that women should be public about this, but I'm not like the average woman, and my experience is not average whatsoever. And I think with the extensive political networks that I had in the past that I still want to be able to tap into, I was anonymous in part because I knew that eventually I would want to synthesize all this work and bridge and go back and bring those people into this. So for me, anonymity was a totally like strategic choice that I don't think is in any way reflects the normative reason why other women go anonymous, because they're scared. Like, I went anonymous because I was worried about like, oh gosh, all these white women are going to think I'm this like totally fucked up person because there's all this stuff about how I hate all these white people. I don't want them to think that they shouldn't work with me, or that like, bringing me into conversations or whatever, I'm just going to like on them or whatever. So that, and like I didn't want the focus on me, and I didn't want to lead with anything about race or even talking about race, because I was coming into it also at a time where everyone was extremely heightened emotions around race because of the social engineering in the media. And it's so interesting, I watched all of that get co-opted, right? I watched like real issues and real conversations that women of color were bringing forward get totally co-opted and manipulated and distilled and like presented into the media in a completely manipulated way. I saw it happen. So anyways, yeah, when it comes to like the anonymity, I just really wanted to focus on the issues that I had in common with the women who are already speaking about this, right? Like, and I think that that's another important thing, is that we need to build solidarity, and we need to be able to connect. We need to focus on what is our common enemy and what is coming down the pipeline. And we've got to just stop telling women not to speak. Just stop telling women to shut up about anything. Just stop it. I'm so tired of it. I have been discouraged from speaking about everything I've said during this show and in the last like 5 years. Like, it's a constant litany of shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up.
And it's from all ends, right? You know, it's not just the trans activists or the leftists or the woke or whatever you want to call it, who've told me to stop talking about things. Like, tons of radical feminists and feminists of various varieties, whatever you want to label them, have been like, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't say this, you shouldn't talk to so and so, like, this is what you should be doing. And it's like, it's so hard because you get bombarded and you do question yourself, and you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. And I respect these women, so I respect their opinion, and I want to take what they're saying seriously. But at the end of the day, like, you really have to fight to be true to yourself and to be authentic to who you are, and you know, fight for your own integrity.
Absolutely. And speaking of integrity, I've struggled so much with like trying to decide to talk about race and all these aspects publicly, because like I said, I knew I was going to talk about it, but I was kind of staving it off for the right time. But I've struggled a lot with it because I don't want to hurt people. I don't want my former friends and communities and networks to think that like, oh, I'm some traitor and horrible person. And I think deep in their hearts, they know that that's BS. but I don't want to offend people. But the reality is we need to talk about this stuff. And I didn't mean, if people are finding offense in what I'm saying, it's because they're not understanding it, and their own projections and their own programming and their own defenses are stopping them, right? And I just think what we're doing, trying to organize to stop the colonization of the female sex, means all females, right? That means we have to have all of us women organizing across racial lines. And when you are organizing across demographics and across racial lines, is bringing in my activist experience, it's strategic to play up your shared struggles and concerns and to focus less on the differences so that you can achieve the immediate goal. And right now, our goal is like saving the continuation of life on Earth. So we need to stop the colonization of the female sex and the takeover of our reproduction and life on Earth. And the one way that we can do that is by unifying our focus and our attention on the real problem. They're framing the problems as race when it's sexism. They're, this is what we really need to be focused on, is how women all over the world are under the yoke of an exploitative system, which now wants to just completely take over our bodies.
And I just want to add, I want to hear your thoughts on this, Isabella. And we have a question in the live chat from Paulo. But yeah, I mean, I just want to say, like, it's also okay for people to be offended. Like, it's like, yeah, people are offended because they get defensive, or maybe they're not understanding what you're saying. Often it is like you just get triggered and you feel defensive. Like, that happens to all of us. It happens to me too, right? But like, fine, that's okay. That's life. You're gonna be offended, and worse, over and over and over again for your whole life. So like, I'm quoting like a comedian, Yanis Pappas, who doesn't have anything to do with any of us, but he was like, get used to it. He's like, because life is shit, and it's gonna get shittier, and horrible things are gonna happen. And I offended you? Great, because I'm helping you. I'm helping train you to understand that sometimes things are gonna make you feel upset or uncomfortable or worse. I wonder, Isabella, do you have anything to add to what Kay was talking about there?
Oh yeah. As you were sharing, part of the work that I do now, well, there's like the ground level work, which is like the birth and, reproductive autonomy and autonomous fertility practices and all of that. And then there's the consciousness part of like, okay, how are we as activists, as women in this, modeling and cultivating tolerance, resiliency, confidence, all of it to move forward. Because I think at the core of not speaking out, or at the core of the fear of offending or being ostracized, is I don't know how to put this, but I'll say like a lack of emotional kind of like literacy. Like, what is mine and what is yours? And this is like a Byron Katie concept. There's your business, my business, and then God's business, or the universe's business. And so what anyone says to me about me or us is their business. Now, how that lands for us is our business. And so because the three of us here are in our business about, standing in truth and standing for free speech and for female reproductive autonomy, things like, hey, you're hateful, you're a bigot, you're this or that, it does not faze us, because we can see that nothing about that rings true for us, right? None of that rings true. So I think the practice of getting less offended is to like dig into, okay, well, what is the part of me that still believes that untruth or that accusation? And so it's been really interesting because in the kind of like the coaching industry, and even the therapeutic industry, there's a lot of gaslighting, there's a lot of spiritual bypass, which is why I think so many people are adverse to, talking about, like the triggers. And the safe space thing has been taken to the extreme where we can't say anything, but there is still space, I think, for these practices. And I think they're actually essential to activism. I think our kind of sustainability in dealing with what we deal with on a daily basis is essential to, this movement and anyone else who's joining in. Because, right now, so many women are just in a state of paralysis. for the material consequences of what, are likely to happen should they kind of stand in truth. So that's
sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah, but you won't be able to keep going. Like if you're fighting for something, if you're in this fight, I mean, this is a hard fight because it's so controversial, and we're up against like huge institutions. We're up against like media and the government and like big pharma, and universities, like academia, like. Never mind all these activists and like our friends and our families and the people around us, and like you just won't make it. You won't be able to continue if you can't take it. Like if you can't figure out what's yours and what's theirs and what you need to take on and what you don't, and like know yourself well enough and be like strong enough in yourself to be like, no, what I'm doing is right, and I have to when to listen, when not to listen, when to change your mind, when to not change your mind. Like there's a lot really coming at you.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just add one more thing. Like the way that Kay speaks and you too, Megan, is like the flavor of like the 70s, like feminists, like not I think, or like, my truth is, it's like very, very direct. And I think, like it's a flavor that we need to bring back rather than flagellation and asking permission or, like qualifying, what we're saying constantly. And then if we just think about, what we know about what stress does to the body, and that, Black women, for example, have higher rates of cancerous cysts and fibroids, from the level of stress that they encounter daily. I mean, the level of stress that we encounter on a daily basis has a literal consequence on our flesh and bones, on our bodies. And so if we are, saying that we stand for truth and nature and, intact, whole, perfect beings, then we, I think need to get, even more resourced, not just on the physical plane, but on the kind of like spiritual capacity too, religious, spiritual, however you want to think about it, to develop even stronger armor than we have right now.
Yes, put on that armor. Speaking about the anonymity, I think for myself, when I first started speaking about it too, I was not necessarily scared, but more so worried that like I would get bogged down in being attacked. So bogged down with like back and forths and responding to, people like mostly like friends, right, telling me to shut up and stuff, that I would get so distracted and bogged down in all of that it would take me away from the message that I knew that I had to deliver. And now I won't say I don't care at all what they think. I do care what they think, because I want them to realize that this is it. This is the trajectory that we need to go on now. We need to realize that we were wrong. We got hoodwinked. We were sorry. I try not to swear. We were swindled.
I swear all the time.
I know. But we got totally swindled. And it's time to like face that fact. And the reality is there are a lot of people who are politically activated and like radicalized, but it's like sort of just needs to be guided a little bit better. Because once people realize that this is big pharma, this is the government, this is the military, like there's all these people like leftists thinking they're so subversive, when really everything they're doing is holding up big pharma, holding up the big banks, the corporate, everything, and the government. It's all in the government. Like, how can you not know there's something wrong when they're getting up saying you need to trans your kids? The president is saying this shit.
They're doing the bidding of the elites, like literally.
And
it's
once
so strange.
People wake up and realize that, I think like not everybody, right? Like some people are just like hopeless, but there are a lot of people out there and a lot of women who are just waiting to be activated about this. They're just waiting for, some way for it to make sense to them. And this is a piece of that puzzle that is going to help this make sense for a lot of women who are feeling like, oh, I don't know if this is for me to question, or maybe I should just ignore this, or I have other things to think about. No, this is what you need to think about. This is the fight that we need everybody at the table at. We need to build a collective consciousness so that we can start building sovereignty for everybody, all people, except for pedophiles.
Caveat. Paulo in the comments asks, how many other cultures try to make sex incidental to womanhood?
Traditionally, none. Traditionally, none. And that's the whole thing with the concept of a third gender. It relies on this idea of a very strict gendered binary where the male sex and the female sex have very clearly distinct and defined roles. Only when you have that can you have a other or a third. And third gender doesn't mean, oh, they have three. It meant other. When anthropologists first introduced that terminology, it literally meant other, not to say a number three. They have three actual genders. It just meant other and deviant to the two that already existed. And all third gender roles and all of that, all throughout the world, they all still recognize who a female is. They never, ever are conflating that these males with different identities or roles or whatever you want to call it, whatever different anthropologists or activists call it, they never said that they were women, that they were actually females, right? They said that they did things like a female.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found it strange that trans activists want to conflate the idea, this concept of a third gender with gender identities, because it doesn't back up their ideologies. It doesn't because exactly as you say, like the third gender wasn't men saying I'm literally female. Like as I understood it, the third gender most often applied to eunuchs.
Not necessarily, but it most often applied to men.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. Like this third gender roles are for men, and that's not true 100% because there are societies that had roles for women, and there are matriarchal, or I should say matrilineal societies that had two spirits, or I'm sorry, so-called third genders. Right. But across the board, the majority of these roles were for men who wanted to act and behave outside the norm of traditional male heteronormativity, whatever that looked like within their culture. Right. And so this was a way that males could play with each other, basically, and play in the roles of women and do that. It wasn't ever about women getting to, I shouldn't say it wasn't ever, but for the most part, this was not about women getting to decide how we're perceived by society, right? So yeah, when it comes to these roles, it's often people think like, oh, well, if a culture or a society had a third gender role, that means that it was some kind of like egalitarian, like queer gender fluid utopia or something. And that is completely not the case. And often, it just reaffirms the gendered binary. And if the gendered binary that your culture has is very sexist, it's just going to reaffirm that sexism. Just like we have now with transgenderism and these men going around saying, oh, I'm a woman because I've got my like titties out and I'm wearing this little skirt and stuff. Like, no.
It's interesting because these things, I mean, they don't seem to see that it really just reinforces sex roles. And sex roles are not necessarily, like, sex roles aren't inherently a bad thing.
Right.
Like, gender roles and sex roles become a bad thing when it's used to, oppress women or to, to say, like, to keep people from having rights, essentially, or, if it's being used to defend violence or like abusive or toxic behaviors, for example. You look like maybe you have something to add, Isabella, there.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking of like my favorite kind of sex role is where, a man is only ever in service to a birthing woman, never entitled to her birth or even being present at the birth, which is like so taboo now. Now we hear terms like we are having a baby, our pregnancy. It's like, no,
we're pregnant.
we're pregnant, you know, we're gonna be taking care of the baby equally. No, the baby is the mom. Even when the baby's born, it is the mom. It is not distinct from, it is highly dependent, attached to on the mom. And, you know, like in matriarchal societies, men wouldn't even dare to ask to see the birth. It was just unfathomable. You know, there wasn't this kind of, but this is related to the kind of fetishizing of women's bodies and the colonization of female biology that Kay was talking to. You know, it really has, you know, there's a resistance obviously to sex roles, and I'm, but you know, what we're speaking to here is like agency. What we all want here is like agency over our own bodies. And so someone had left a comment about, you know, like the right wanting to force women to give birth and the left wanting to sterilize, and obviously the commonality there is the control.
Exactly. Population control, woman control, an order of global population control where the reproductive technology is owned by a scientific technological elite, and that it belongs in service of them and in service of male supremacist power structure. That's where this is headed.
I'm curious to know, I hope this doesn't get off topic too much, but I'm curious to know what you all think. I'm thinking of this because I've come around in the past year or two, I think, to understanding that, you know, what I just said, which is that sex roles aren't inherently a bad thing. Gender roles aren't inherently a bad thing. I wonder what you two think about the idea of abolishing gender, which has been something that radical feminists often advocate for, like get rid of gender entirely. And I think I probably said that in the past, and I've sort of stopped saying it now because I'm not quite sure I believe that anymore.
I have an example that came to mind. I love that question. So I went through a phase, I guess I'm still in the phase where I can't remember the last time I wore a skirt. Definitely not a flowy, you know, floor length skirt. And so, you know, in my kind of peaking and introduction to a radical feminist analysis, I found myself pushing back against conformity in that way. And then I was studying from a woman who is all about the Taoist tradition and energy and sexual healing. And she talked about women, the importance of women wearing long skirts and long dresses to absorb energy from the earth, to charge the yoni, like through the earth, you know? And I just thought, wow, that is super confronting for my radical feminist analysis, that there actually might be a function to this open, long, you know, skirt, and for men too, not just for women, but the yoni as a particular portal, obviously, that men don't have. So, and there's also some confronting stuff in that tradition in terms of, you know, homosexuality. You know, there are like prescriptions for women who only sleep with women to kind of charge up their yonis through the sun. Like they talk about it not in a kind of pathology, but that there is like an energetic deficiency when women are not getting penetrated by men, and to the like, when men are not having that sexual energy exchange with women. And so it's not, again, in the lens of pathology, but just like our physiology requires different things. And when we are not matched energetically in that kind of yin yang, it can show up in our bodies and in our kind of like our expression. And so those kinds of studies have certainly challenged the idea that, you know, the function of a skirt or a dress is to make us not utilitarian, or to kind of strip us of our ability to run away easily or to ride a bike, or, you know, kind of all of the kind of predominant, you know, maybe
not true. Like, have these people seen the beautiful clothing of like indigenous cultures that women all over the world wear? The beautiful, highly ornamental, like cultural clothing. It's not all about oppressing women.
Totally.
No, and I mean, that's the problem with the like feminist lens too, is you start to see everything through this lens of like oppression and this modern this modern, like Western centric vision of what sexism is and what gender means and what patriarchy means, and we are missing a lot in terms of history and cross-cultural context, and I think that really limits our analysis and puts blinders on. What do you think about that idea, Kay, of abolishing gender?
I'm not with it at all. I never was. I had some friends before I ever came to any of this, and I was still in a lot of like really radicalized leftist spaces. I had some friends that were like interested in the abolition of gender, and it never made sense to me back then either, because I thought, well, how can I be in support of Indigenous women and Indigenous sovereignty if I'm trying to nix their like traditionally, culturally specific and appropriate roles? If I'm trying to say that they shouldn't have those and they shouldn't exist, that's not true, because they're saying that they need to be able to occupy their traditional roles and have the type of value that they used to have to be able to have the sovereignty that they're fighting for. Right. So if I'm going to say, no, you can't have your traditional role, that's a problem, too.
Yeah.
And the thing is that all societies all over the world, no matter what culture, they're all based around a binary system of the two sexes, and gendered roles get built around each sex. And the female, her roles are always around childcare and childbirth, because that's what we do. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with organizing societies around that. It's just like what Megan was saying. The problem comes into play when the exploitation and the domination gets added.
Known heretic in the live chat asks, can you all say explicitly what you mean by gender? I mean, I'm talking about sex roles. I'm talking about like, I mean, when I talk about gender in my analysis of like gender identity and like sexism, I'm talking about stereotypes that are applied to males and females. So men are like this, women are like this, women are good at this, men are good at this. Like women like these things or behave in this way, men like these things, behave in this way. And I do think that those ideas are problematic, mostly just because I want people to be able to like whatever they want to like. And I think, you know, for the most part in places like Canada and the US, people really are pretty free to like what they like and do what they want to do and dress how they want to dress. I don't think that we're super limited in that regard anymore, so I'm not super concerned about it. But I think in terms of like, I think when I'm saying like gender roles or sex roles are not inherently bad, what I'm saying is that like these qualities, like, you know, when I was a young feminist, you know, like when I was a teenager, I just thought everything attached to woman or girl was bad. Like being nurturing was bad, pink was bad, being a mother was bad, giving birth was bad, being a wife was bad, being a housewife was bad, like being attached to any I didn't want anything to do with any girl thing, because obviously it was better to be like a boy and to like boy things and to wear
boys
boy
are obviously
clothes.
better than girls.
So that's not super like helpful, you know, and it's not definitely not true, you know.
Yeah. And I think there's something really like helpful about swinging the pendulum like so far to one end to then kind of find yourself, you know, in what feels good for you. I mean, I think, you know, coming away from like choice feminism, it is hard to figure out like what is actually ours, like what our preferences actually are. Do we have any preferences? Are we making any choices?
Right.
And
do we have free will?
Yes, do we have free will? And like makeup was one for me, you know, like I, with kind of my understanding of the kind of toxicity and the lymphatic system, I did away with like almost all skincare products, including makeup. And now when I think about revisiting that idea in a natural, eco-friendly way, it has just kind of evaporated. More of just like the practical thing, but then there's something really beautiful about staring at oneself in the mirror and like seeing, you know, your reflection, your reflection, as Serendipity says, like I see the goddess in my reflection. Like there's something really beautiful about grooming oneself and adorning oneself that has been totally flipped, and in a very misogynistic way, we've been told that this is vanity. That to stare at ourselves in the mirror and to adorn ourselves in the mirror is a vanity, like hence the word for the place where you do that called the vanity, right? So there is a kind of reclamation that I think is there's a lot of space in that, including with makeup, adornment, dress, garb, all of this. That I do agree with you, Megan. You know, in some respects, radical feminism is kind of it's a slippery slope. Like we don't want to go there. We don't want to go too far. So yeah, I agree, I guess, with Kay that I'm not a gender abolitionist.
I do want to like expand a little bit on what I mean when I'm talking about gender. And I'm actually going to spend a significant like introduction in the class really breaking down all of this stuff, because I think it is so important, and because we have received so much mixed messaging. And I know, what did Amy say here? Amy said, Amy Souza says, I agree we have sex differences but do we require the problematic word gender to talk about our embodied sex differences? Why not just use the word sex? Well, so gender is important because gender is a system, it's a structure, and it's a hierarchy, right? And it's a system of organizing human beings based on our sex biology, and it dictates what life is going to look like for a man or for a woman, for a male or a female, within their particular culture, right? So it's important that we look at gender because it's a system. It's not important to gender everything we do. Right? It's not necessarily important for us to ascribe gender to everything, but it is important to examine how our society has ascribed gender to males and females, if that makes more sense. You know, and our sexed bodies are where we experience sex-based oppression, but that sex-based oppression is applied to women differently in different places based on the gender hierarchy that they come from. Right. So if you come from a society where the gender system operates in a way that is very oppressive to females, then we need to know the differences between how women are being treated based on our sex, and how that varies from culture to culture and place to place. That's why gender is important. It's not important to gender for that we ascribe meaning through gender, but it is important that we know how our society does that, right? Because the way that they've applied meaning and value to our bodies as Western women, and that looks different to different race women, but the way that they've done that, that's part of how we got here, right? So we can't just not examine gender, and that's why I think it's important. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the class, but I want to take just a minute because I read Amy's comment, and I just want to acknowledge her while everybody is listening, because without Amy Souza, the protest that I organized at the United Nations wouldn't have happened. Like, she was a major help for me for that. Like, she was there every day meeting with me and like being a soundboard for all of my everything and just helping to do stuff. And I think I want to thank her and acknowledge her for that, and just say that it's so important that we be organizing across racial lines. If we weren't, then I wouldn't be here. You know, like, it's ridiculous for people to say that we shouldn't be talking about race, that we shouldn't be talking about these things, because we need women of all races. I think that this movement, if you want to call it, has been enriched by a lot of the things that I have to offer and the relationships that I have with different women. I know that they've been enriched by it. And why should I not be part of these? Why should I be made to feel like I don't belong? And I'm not saying anybody's doing that to me, but like, why should there be a narrative created that I don't belong in these spaces? Why should we let outsiders create that narrative and say that other women of color don't belong in these spaces, and that this is a white women's issue? That's not true. and we're going to prove that it's not true, and it's demonstrably, like, obviously not true. And that's another thing, is like, it all about representation, right? Like, if we didn't, like, if the media wasn't so heavily controlled, it wouldn't seem like this is just a white women's issue or only white women are speaking up, right? Like, it would not seem like that. The media is a big part of engineering the image of, like, who is resisting this.
Like,
right?
Putting you're saying, like, putting like J.K. Rowling and like as the face of the new face of.
Don't even get me started on that.
No, get started. I want to hear it.
No, not for a private chat, maybe.
Megan, were you gonna follow up to that?
No, I just want to know what you're.
You just want to know the
I just want to know the dirt. No.
But I want to speak about representation, because that's a big part of this issue, right? Like, when I was growing up, there were no Asian women on TV, like, at all. And if they were, it was like a really sexist, racialized image and representation, and it never reflected me. It always made me feel ashamed and bad, and like, there just wasn't good representation. And there isn't now either. I'm not saying that there is now. I was never a fan of pushing for representation, because I always said, why would we want them to represent us? Why would we want, like, these corporations that are backed and partnering with the government? Why would we want them to represent our image and represent what our lives are like, right? So anyways, there was no representation. Now there's all this representation, right? But you see women of color all over now speaking, but guess what they're doing? They're shilling for transgenderism.
Yeah, the diversity that we're seeing in Hollywood. So there's tons and tons of diversity now, but it's all fake, and they're all shilling for, like, corporations, big business, and this, like, trans ideology, like, bullshit. Everything they say is bullshit. All of their politics are bullshit.
Exactly. And it speaks to, like, the consolidation of corporate media, right? The fact that we have, like, basically 4 major media conglomerates that decide everything that we see and hear, and they decide what we don't see. And media representation today is just extremely controlled. So even when a voice of resistance gets presented in the mainstream, it's still a selection that's being made, right? And different groups of people and voices get platformed by mainstream media at different times to deliver a different message. And some voices get excluded altogether. And that's social engineering. That's part of what social engineering is, and it's intentional, and it manufactures this, like, false image of resistance, and it creates a narrative that strategically benefits the overarching trans agenda and the agendas of the state. And, like, even women like you, Megan, and like Kelly J. Keene, who've got, like, international attention speaking on this issue, have been sidelined and skipped over, right, for the voices of, like, men, right? Like, largely white men with Christian conservative backgrounds. And, like, Kelly J's been going around blasting the definition of woman on billboards for years. But, like, this production team for Matt Walsh was
the first to ask that question, just like last month. He came up with it.
He just came up with it.
Where are all the feminists?
And why couldn't he find you? Why couldn't he find Kelly J? It's bullshit. It's a complete
Well, he knows. He knows me. He knows Kelly J. Like, he knows.
Exactly.
You know, like, he's just lying. That's what pisses me off about this. Like, I watched his documentary and
to his funders.
Well, and he's making tons of money off this. Like, he has financial access, and he has platforms that none of us have access to. And what he chose to do with that money and that power and those platforms was to platform himself and to erase women from a conversation about erasing women. And do whatever you want to do. Like, I watched his documentary and I was like, this is good. This is funny. I'm entertained. These questions make it clear that gender identity ideology doesn't make any sense. But his commentary around the whole thing and his behavior around the whole thing was so appalling and disingenuous. And the reason that he's doing it is not the reason that he excluded feminists from his platform and pretended that he invented this question, pretended that he was the only man brave enough to speak out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is because he hates feminists. And that's, you know what? That's fine. He doesn't have to like feminism. He's Catholic. He doesn't have very much in common with us. But the irony is that I and Kelly J and lots of us, you know, like Isabella and I were just on a panel in Austin, like that was like across the political spectrum. We all actually are walking the talk when we say like, we'll work with people that we don't agree with on all sorts of things. I want to hear from all sorts of people. I want to fight this issue with people who are sincere and have integrity. And, you know, like there's plenty of women who I'm sure would have worked with Matt Walsh. He doesn't want to work with any women. He doesn't want to work with any feminists. He wants to exclude us from the conversation and he wants to promote himself. He's a grifter.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm so glad.
I don't know how many people I pissed off by saying that.
yeah.
Probably like that.
Yeah. And it's one thing to work with women who are anti-abortion rights. It's another thing to work with a man or to congratulate a man who's talking about this, who's also against abortion rights. I mean, he literally wants to lock up women. Any woman who participates or aids another woman in releasing a pregnancy, he referred to us as baby murderers. We're going to lock up all the baby murderers.
One of those ones on the right who are making jokes about, like, I mean, that this conversation around abortion, it can be quite complex, but there is, you know, it's presented as though there's people who support abortion and then there's right-wing people who are like, these people just want to kill babies. But he is one of those right-wing men who is like accusing women like us, but also, you know, the annoying lefty, liberal feminists who don't have a cohesive analysis of anything, of, you know, like, oh, they're just mad because they can't go around killing babies. It's like, yeah, that's what we're worried about. We just want to kill babies. Like, shut up. Like, you're so disingenuous and so, like, it's all about his narrative. He's trying to present a certain narrative. And he's managing to do that, right? He's changing the narrative so that now the narrative is, why does only the right know what a woman is?
Well, and that's the thing is, like, yes, he is the agent of this and he's doing these things, but it's not just him. There's the whole corporate media is consolidating to do this type of social engineering. There's a reason why. And especially now, we need to understand with the way that the artificial intelligence and the algorithms work, like they are intentionally inflating those voices and suppressing voices like ours. That's all that's happening. That's not like, oh, what? Like, no, that's happening. Duh.
I've noticed also the phrase radical feminist is like misused all the time. I mean,
when they are talking about TRAs, they say radical feminist. That's all intentional social engineering. When you see that stuff, it's not on accident.
No.
Maybe like some people who are repeating the talking points, they're not doing it intentionally. But when you have such a huge platform,
like PragerU,
exactly. Yeah. Don't get me started on some of those alternative media things and where they actually get their funding from. But so, you know, by and large, the women who have been platformed by mainstream media to speak on this issue around trans issues have been white. And this fact has been exploited by detractors, right? To bolster the idea that this is a white woman's issue and threats to women and children posed by trans ideology are really only something that like a white feminist pearl clutching woman would be concerned about. And that creates this artificial image of resistance that doesn't reflect the reality that there's women of all races who are against this. They're creating a false representation that it's a white women's issue. Then it gets presented as a deterrent to warn women of other races to stay away from this topic, to stay away from the women who talk about it. And if you're a white woman and you talk about it, you're racist. And if you're a woman of color and you talk about it, you're a traitor and you're an agent of white supremacy. Or if they don't know what race you are, then they're just going to call you a white racist, whether they even know what your race you are or not. So if they can turn like questioning transgender to be like if questioning transgender can be coded as racist and a function of white supremacy, then trans inclusive feminism gets to be presented in direct contrast, right? As being this like really more modern and progressive form of feminism that includes both trans women and women of color. So if women of color...
Intersectional.
Yeah, intersectional. So, but if women of color who have been speaking about this issue, like myself or Dr. Suzanne Veerling or Jessica Gonzalez or Vaishnavi Sundar, if we were being asked to speak in a visible way and critique of trans as much as like women of color were getting platformed all over TV and social media to simp for trans, then we wouldn't be really having this question, would we?
I think we should try to wrap up soon. I think Isabella might have to be out of here by 6.
It was like getting dark.
I'm okay. I'm okay. I can push back. I have something around 6:30, which is why I was planning to leave in like 20 minutes or something.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's try to wrap up in, I don't know, 15 minutes or so. But so if anyone has any more questions, please ask them in the live chat. I'm going to put the link to the masterclass that Isabella and K are putting on in the live chat. That's on Thursday, July 28th. So you can sign up at that link I just posted, and the link's also below in the show notes. I'm wondering, this is in reference to something you were talking about earlier, Kay. I'm wondering what do you say to women who are afraid to speak up because, you know, they don't want to get canceled by their friend group. They don't want to deal with a bunch of harassment. They don't they're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about impacts. I mean, how do you, I don't want to say excuses in a disrespectful way necessarily, because it's like, I get it. Like women get mad at me when I talk about this stuff because they're like, well, I don't want to lose my job. I'm like, I didn't want to lose my job either. Like, you know, I also like safety and income and friends and don't have to deal with people being assholes to me out on the street or in the bar, or like deal with like people that I know talking shit about me to my boyfriend or to my family, or like people, you know, coming up to me and being like, you know, I think you should stop being such a jerk to trans people. I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm like. I don't want to have this fucking conversation with you. You know what I mean? But like, it's not like, people, this idea that it's only privileged women who have the privilege to speak up about this is garbage, because I mean, I don't like that concept of privilege, but it's not like, you know, it's not like I had a bunch of money and so I thought, oh, if I don't have an income and can't get a job, I'll be fine, because I won't be fucking fine. Like, I don't like, and you know, so but I get it. I understand what your fears are, because it sucks. And we've all been through it. And we know that it sucks. It's really hard.
Yeah. And that's part of how they like keep people in fear, right? Is by picking like someone like you and making you this like sacrificial person, right? Like, look at what happened. If you do this and that, what happened to her is going to happen to you.
Right. I mean, that's why they do things like they ban me from Twitter and things like that, because they're like, just so you know, if you say that men aren't women, you're also going to get banned from social media. But yeah. So what do you say to that? Like, what do you say women who are afraid to speak up? What do you?
It's just like, stop being afraid, because it's like, have a little bit of fear now, or have everything taken away from us and lose our ability to mount a resistance whatsoever. Okay, like, I don't know how many years ago was it, like 5 years ago? No, oh my God, time is just like, what is time anymore? When Magdalene Burns was speaking about if you don't speak out now, you're going to lose your right to even name yourself as a woman or a lesbian, or name reality. And she said that, like, what, I'm getting like chills thinking about it. It was like 7 years ago or something that she said that. And look at now. We have lost all of our rights. We don't exist as a separate and distinct category. They're taking our name, the name woman, out of everything. Women are being punished. Like, what more needs to happen before you stand up and say something?
Yeah, I mean, I just posted this in the comments, but that's why Bill C-16 passed in Canada, was because nobody said anything. Like, I was trying to talk, and it was very easy to marginalize me, because who am I? I'm an independent writer. I'm an independent journalist. I'm nobody. I don't have connections to anybody. I have no political power, and I did manage to speak up a little bit, and, you know, like Jordan Peterson spoke up. but everyone just sat around being like, I don't know, I don't really, like, a lot of people didn't really know what was going on, but people didn't know what was going on because the people who did know what was going on were not speaking up, and it passed. And now like I feel like it's almost too late in Canada, and it's like, this is what happens when you don't speak up. Is it better to protect yourself and not have to go through hard times and not lose some friends or even like lose your job, and then this happens and then it's too late? Like, you can't go back, or it's very difficult to go back in any case.
You know, before people were scared to talk about men like coming into our spaces, now the World Health Organization is saying that sex is not limited to male and female. I don't know if people saw that yet, but the World Health Organization, which is part of the United Nations, a lot of people don't understand that. World Health Organization is underneath the umbrella of the UN. So they're now saying sex is not limited to male and female, and there's a massive push going on within anthropology and what's the, I can't think right now. But they're basically trying to stop the accurate recording of sex based on skeletal remains. So, I mean, how far does this have to go? This is amped up so far, and people were afraid to talk about the medical mandates. Now they're pushing mandatory experimental shots on children and babies. People were scared to talk about the lockdowns, and look at what they did. They absolutely destroyed people's lives and the economy. And what else are we going to be scared to speak about? Pedophilia is literally being normalized before our eyes. Like, it's time to buck up and stand up for children and for all future generations. And we can't be scared, because guess what? Nobody is more scared than a confused and abused child.
Yeah, I think, I mean, your point about the mandates and the lockdowns is really good, because it, you know, people are just like, oh, if I just do this, if I just go along with this, it'll be okay. And then there's a new thing. It's like, well, we'll just go along with this, and then it'll be okay. And then there's, just one more thing. And it's like, no, this never ends. Got it? Like, this is just going to keep happening and happening and happening. And you just have to say no. Like, this happens incrementally.
That's the thing. When all this started with the COVID, I knew it was bullshit from day one. And the fact that it came from China, just please, I can't deal with people taking it seriously when it came from a bat stew in China. Just stop. Or whatever they say it came from. It doesn't matter. It's a long story of nonsense. But like, I told myself from day one, like, okay, people are clearly already acting crazy and they're about to go off the deep end and they're going somewhere, and you're not going with them. You're going to remain right here, grounded in reality and what you do know, and you're not going along with this. And like, I posted a picture, I think today on Instagram or last night or something, of Isabella and I at one of the protests in New York City against the mandates, and I had made these signs, which were actually really great, right, Isabella? Because we had people come up to us and talk to us about them, because I made signs based on, like, you know, a lot of the people on the right were saying like, oh, well, it's your body, your choice when you want an abortion, but not your body. What about my body, my choice when I don't want to wear a mask or take a vaccine? And guess what? I happen to be in support of female reproductive sovereignty for women. And I also happen to be in support of bodily autonomy and against medical mandates of all kinds. And those two things, we need to have both those things. You can't have just one.
Right.
It's so funny to me, because I take in information from people who are on all like sides of the political spectrum. And it is so just annoying seeing like a lot of the gender critical feminists say stuff like, just like, it's like, my body, my choice. What about when you didn't want to wear a mask? What about when you didn't? Like, I don't know what they like, these arguments. They make these like strange arguments where it's like literally the converse of what the conservative right wing people are, who's coded as conservative and right wing. I'm coded like that for being anti all the lockdowns and all that. But they have like this converse message, and it's just really strange. And I brought this up to say, like, back in October, Isabella and I were standing out there making the connection between the mandates and women's reproductive control and our bodily autonomy. And less than 6 months later, what happened? And back then, women were telling me to shut up. Like, I can't tell you how many women since the beginning of the lockdowns and stuff, and I was speaking out immediately, and I was getting like a lot of women telling me to shut up. And in my private messages telling me to shut up, and I'm crazy.
And it's distracting us from our fight. It's always the reason for telling you to shut up is it's distracting. It's like, oh, all this infighting around this is distracting us. We need to band together to fight this. And it's like, no, you don't mean we need to band together to fight that, because we can still do that. What you mean is that you have to follow my political ideology and use my mantras and not go off narrative and not have your own independent thought because I don't like it. And it's like, first of all, it doesn't make any sense to be fighting for bodily autonomy if you're not going to fight for bodily autonomy. Like, you need to have, like, I think it's important to have a coherent and cohesive analysis so that you don't look like a hypocrite or irrational.
Yes.
But yeah, that way that I know. I mean, I got my final, I've been canceled by like everybody a million times over, but I think like my final cancellation by feminists, like by radical feminists anyway, was around my support for free speech and freedom of expression, my support for people's constitutional rights in Canada, and my opposition to the lockdowns and to the vaccine mandates, because that's when I really became a right winger, just like you two. It was official then.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No.
You
go, Isabella. Please.
I was gonna speak to the question you had, Megan, about women speaking out and being in fear and all of that. And the first thing I want to say about that is, I think beneath the surface of the I'm afraid to lose this and that is the fear of no one's coming to save us. And so right, if I face this thing that you're talking about, like, I have to face that it's that bad. To say goodbye to this relationship, to this career, to that, like, that is a confrontation of the magnitude of this issue. And so if the magnitude of this issue is so much bigger than I could have ever imagined, then now how do I see myself in the world? I mean, that was an orientation that, like, I started to confront, when I learned about fertility awareness method, when I was like, whoa, like, these pills and these doctors, like, it's actually not for me. And that, are you telling me that now I can do it myself? Okay, well, that's a huge responsibility, but wow, there's also so much power there. And then the other thing I like to talk, women, who come to me who are, I'm afraid to do this, I'm afraid to do that. What are the consequences and whatnot, of what they're going to lose, thinking about, like, can you afford to not speak out? Like, the body will keep the score. Like,
yes, the body keeps the score.
That level of self-betrayal will eat you to your core. And I think, this is something that I've heard from the detransitioned women over and over, like, how exhausting it was to lie to themselves every day and to lie to others. And so I would say most women actually can't afford not to. Like, that level of self-betrayal is the worst. It's way worse than being called a bigot on the internet.
Totally.
Yeah, you're the one who has to live with yourself at the end of the day. And I don't know how you could live with yourself while also lying. You're living that, like, dual life. Like, I cannot do it. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Kay?
Yeah, just like when like what you're saying about not being able to afford not to do it. Like there's all this stuff I said before, like, oh, we can't afford to because this is the colonization of female reproductive technology and we need to stop that on a larger level. Yes, but then there's like the personal individual. Like, I couldn't afford to keep on going along with the lies, right? Like, literally it had gotten to the point where the lies were saying that, like, a male rapist that I know is a man, that I had to call him a woman, that I had to raise money to move him to a women's cell, and he raped a boy. And I got an email from my friend, not saying like what had happened, but saying, oh, we need to raise money because so-and-so is being criminalized and they're being attacked and transphobia. And I was asked for money, and so were other people asked for money. I'm like, so survivors of child sexual abuse are supposed to give money to a pedophile? It was like, I I couldn't take it anymore. And it was like all of the lies just kind of like, it just cracked right open for me. And I got sick. I was like sick for like 2.5 weeks. Like I was sick to my stomach. I was so disgusted. And like, and it was like the realization of everything. It was like, yeah, that one thing cracked it open. And then my mind was like, oh my God, what have you done? And it happened like kind of really quick. And I was literally sick. Like I couldn't leave my apartment for like 2.5 weeks. I literally didn't leave the apartment. I was like, it was terrible. And I felt like I felt like I was going to die because I couldn't believe what I had like done and how I had oriented my entire life to supporting this agenda, how I was indoctrinating children, how I was indoctrinating Asian youth. Like it really, it's horrible when you realize that you were wrong, but it's more horrible to be quiet and not say anything while it keeps on happening, because we cannot afford to let the controllers continue to dominate this narrative, right? We can't let them continue to just like create a picture of the resistance to this. We have to make our own resistance. We have to make our own media. We have to make our own platforms, and we have to collaborate with the other women who are bold enough and brave enough to say this stuff. And like, we just keep on doing it and making headway. And like, I know it's working because like, Megan, you were one of the people that I watched years ago when I was like, you know, like looking around, like, is anybody saying it? When I realized it was fucked up. And then I was like, oh my God, is like anybody doing anything about this? And like, you were one of the handful of people that I saw were like saying anything. And like that was then. And like, now here I am sitting on the show with you having this discussion. So like, it works when women come out and be bold and say the things. It attracts other women who want to be bold and who want to say the truth. And like, you doing that attracted me to it. And not just you, but like other women. But the more we do stuff like this, the more we show women, come on, like you can do it too. Like just stop sitting on your hands and let's go, because we just don't have any time to waste. My God, like literally, what are we waiting for?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I was so upset that live in-person events were canceled over COVID for a variety of reasons, but because I've done these events live and I know that it galvanizes women, and you two were both at that New York canceled women event. And at that event, I know that women came to that event and then started speaking up and started organizing and met other women and started doing things. And when they see other women, when they see our bodies, our faces, we're there, we're speaking up, we're telling the truth, we're not afraid, then more and more people start to, like, it's so important.
Yeah, actually the canceled women event in New York City, that was the first time I ever like went into physical space, met with other women to like talk about this, other than like some hush conversation I had with someone who didn't want to hear it in my personal life. You know what I mean? It was the first time I really went out there in the physical world and put my face out there, met other women, like shared just a physical like feeling of being together. And I was like charged by it. And I think that weekend, I don't remember what I did, but I know like one of my friends, Jen Ziggin, like I met up with her and we went around like stickered shit and like, you know, yelled stuff on the street corners and like held up signs up just by ourselves, just because we were feeling so much like we wanted to say something, you know. So it does, like, speaking and create, you know, just putting yourself out there, it's important. And like, that's part of why I'm doing this class. That's part of why I agreed to talk about these things. It's part of why I am speaking about race and colonialism, because I want to show women that like there are other women who aren't scared to talk about this stuff. We're not scared to talk about the trajectory of where this is headed, that this is about technological takeover, female reproductive control. This is colonization, and it's rooted in colonialism and slavery. And there's a history of that needs to be connected. We need to synthesize what's happening now, what's happened in the past, how this has all happened, and where it's going. And brave women want to do that. And I, like you guys, and like, I'm here for it. I'm here for the conversations. And I think that us talking about it, yes, there will be detractors that want to like, you know, pop in and say, oh, you don't know this, you don't know what you're talking about, or you're racist or this or that. That's par for the course. We know that. And there are also going to be a lot of really important conversations that come from this. I know just by bringing up this conversation, like a number of Native women have voiced their concerns about this now on social media that didn't say those things before. Not that they were never talking about it, but like they've had something explicitly to say about this because we made room to say like, hey, it is okay to talk about this and we're not scared. And like, yeah, we understand that not every conversation is going to be all honky-dory and everybody walks away feeling 100% amazing. No, but it's not about that. We have to be uncomfortable sometimes when we're having conversations. It's not always a bad thing. Because sometimes when we're uncomfortable, it's because we're pushing up against the programming, right? Like we're pushing up against programming in our minds. And
do you have something to add, Isabella?
Oh, well, maybe just something logistical that I wanted to add. I'm just so, I don't know, I'm feeling a lot of joy right now. I mean, it's really something special to be talking about dark shit all day and then to also feel like you're in the perfect place at the perfect time and like also feeling joy. It's a very weird experience that I know both of you can relate to. But what I wanted to say about the masterclass is that for anyone who wants that information, who cannot attend live, you can secure early bird pricing until the next day at noon Central Standard Time. So secure early bird pricing now. You will get access to the recording the following day. And this will be available on my website for as long as I have a website. So we are so committed to making this information possible to put in the hands of women. And we could not, Kay could not do this presentation on a podcast or even on a live stream. Like the information that she is going to be sharing in this live masterclass is paradigm shaking information. So if you are committed to kind of taking your knowledge and your curiosity to the next level, we are just so excited for those to have it.
Right on. Should we wrap up? Do you guys have anything you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think wrapping up is good. I just want to highlight one of the voices in the comments. There's a comment from Cedar that says, in Lakota culture, there were men who liked to dress as women and called winkte. There were men, women, and winkte, also intersex people. Two-spirit, well, what is now called two-spirit were gay people, is what this account is saying, and that none were synonymous with being trans. And that's a really good point, because what's happening with two-spirit as well is this is a modern term and it's being like posthumously applied to people in the past. That's not right. You can't take something from a current context and put it onto these culturally specific roles, right? Because actually what you end up doing is erasing those culturally specific roles and homogenizing, and that's not good either. So there was that comment, and then there was one more comment from the same commenter. There's a lot of lateral violence if you happen to be Native or Indigenous and you don't shill for the trans community right now. And that's what this person is saying. And this is also what I'm hearing from people within Indigenous community and other communities of color. There is lateral violence going on. People are being told not to speak about stuff. And there was a woman in Philadelphia, a Black woman, who she spoke on the Can I Get a Witness conference, online conference that I spoke on a couple years ago that Joey Bright did. A woman from Philadelphia came on and shared her story about how she was literally beat down by her own friends for not accepting her male friend as a woman. So like, there are all that kind of stuff is happening. And I don't say that to say, oh, don't be scared and don't talk about stuff. I say to say this is the severity of the lengths that people will go to not just silence us, but also to get their own way, right? Like we've moved into like this thing where it's people aren't even really pushing agendas. They're just pushing to get what they want and like to dominate other people and like force their view on others and to like be right. They don't even really know what they're fighting for or what the agenda is, right? So anyways, I just want to highlight that because I thought that was important. And there was another comment on, like, check out the comment section on Isabella's Instagram for her post today, because there were some really interesting comments there from Indigenous women talking about how a lot of it is coming from them with community as well. So yeah, and why wasn't there a panel of Indigenous women speak about this? Well, maybe in the future there will be now. Maybe we keep showing that it's okay to talk about this stuff and that there are women of all races who want to have these conversations, and more women start coming forward and sharing their experience and their perspective, because we don't have all the answers. We need other women to come to the table and provide pieces of the puzzle that we're missing. And the reality is that we need the voices of women of all races to speak up and say no. And if we don't have women of all races speaking up, they're going to continue to use us against one another. They're going to continue to use women of different races, pit us against one another to the detriment of all women and all humanity. And their biggest fear is what's happening right now. Their biggest fear is for women to unite with one another across race and see that this is actually an attack on our female sex bodies. And once that happens, it's game over for the New World Order. It's game over. They're coming for the kids. They're coming for the kids. They're coming for our bodies. And we have to stand together, all of us, and say no. And I honestly think that women together, united, can topple the New World Order. New World Order.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that we managed to do this live stream. I'm so sorry about my tech issues. I'm so glad that this internet situation got sorted.
This was
and
better.
Yeah, thank you both
That was
for
great.
like coming to me with this. I again, the link to sign up to Unpacking Common Myths and Misconceptions about Indigenous Two-Spirit and Third Genders on Thursday the 28th is in the show notes. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. This was awesome. And thanks everyone who attended. Like and subscribe. I hate saying that, but I know that I'm supposed to. I always forget to. Okay, bye. Yeah, now you plug your stuff. You'll be better at that than I will.
Buy my stickers if you
They're
haven't
so
seen them
good.
before. And check out the website, stopfemaleerasure.com. There's tons of information on there and resources about what the United Nations is doing, what their role is in female erasure. And I've also got another sticker from the iconic banner that we held outside the United Nations. That maybe a lot of people don't know that we did that now, but we made history and we showed a voice of resistance, and now we're using what we did there to get attention on this issue. A lot of people are waking up to the fact that the UN and some of these big global governing bodies like the World Economic Forum are behind this, and that we need to unite against all of the agendas being pushed by them. And I just want to say thank you so much to Megan for having me. This has been just honestly awesome. Really great conversation. And thank you to Isabella for having the courage to platform my talk. Crazy that, people have to have courage to platform these conversations, but thank you for doing that. And to all the people listening, watching, if you've benefited from any of my work, please support me. I had a Patreon. All of my money was taken away. All of the money I had made in the last 4 years. I was saving up money for an event that I wanted to put on. They took all of my money and they shut down my account for hate speech. Yeah.
They give you the money?
No, so I had the money. I didn't take it out of the account. I didn't realize that they could take it. So
I didn't know that they could do that either.
I want to put it in my bank account because
God. That's a good lesson for, not like but like even for Venmo, PayPal, it's never wise to keep anything in those accounts because they're just they're just making money from you keeping it there, just like a checking account. And then obviously the controversy of what you're talking about. That's so fucked up.
Yeah, they took my ability to try to raise money to support my work. And like,
Yeah.
obviously I'm not getting paid to do any of this. I'm working all the time trying to expose this shit. And like, if you appreciate the work, if you support it, if you have the means, if you want to, go ahead and pop on over and support me. You can do it by buying stickers, or also I have a Give Butter page, givebutter.com/TheDeprogrammerXX. And yeah, just keep on listening, plugging in, and being open to these conversations. And even if you don't like get all of it now or what we're talking about, just like stay tuned, because we're going to keep unpacking all of this stuff, not just in the master class, but like other conversations, hopefully like this.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Kay. I'm so glad we met, and it's been really fun collaborating virtually and in person the past few years. And to echo, Kay, what you said earlier about, going to that Cancel Women's event and seeing Megan speak for the first time, that was so impactful for me. Like, that was everything. That was really foundational to moving forward. So I just want to echo you on that. And thank you so much, Megan, for having us. This was really awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad that it worked out. Cool. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you both so much. This was great again. And hope to do it again sometime.
For sure.
So we're signing off. Everyone have a great Friday night and a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.